mean, explain everything is is a bit of an overstatement, but there certainly are different. There are many people who do talk that way.
I was in New York, and Fifth Avenue, like between 47th and 57th, or between 40 and 57th Street, which is like where all the shops are and where a lot of people shop. They closed it down only to allow people to walk on Sundays during December. So literally all that part is shut down, which means that there's a lot more people going to the shops, and because it's a lot nicer to walk on Fifth Avenue when there's no cars coming and you can have all the space on the sidewalk.
Okay. No, this is a classic widespread international issue or the one center of it we can identify is called the New Urbanism, and its headquarters was in Chicago, led by the Norquist, who was the former mayor of Milwaukee, and we had his book was on the reading list. He came to this class, and he made a presentation, and he then what he'd done most dramatically, one of the most, he did lots of things, was closed down the freeway exits, so freeways could go. People on the freeway could just keep going straight, but they couldn't get out or in from Milwaukee. And so internationally, he's trying to do the same thing, going all around. In Seoul, it made one of the most dramatic shutting down of all the freeways right in the middle of Seoul. and so he's taken that, and now you mentioned you're working on climate control and cars. Any quick update on your paper topic then?
Yeah, so it's focusing a lot more on the idea of shutting down cities in favor of public transportation and public movement. And I've been reading a lot of things about the 2024 Olympics, which will be in Paris, which are accelerating the process of change, where it's like initially it was supposed to take 10 years for a certain neighborhood to be closed down only for people to walk, and now because of the climate and the quantity of tourists they're expecting, well, it's become forbidden to cars. And then the second part is, although they talk all this big game about improving public transportation and extending the lines and adding a lot more subway trains, they're not ready for the Olympics, and it's going to be a disaster because they've already planned as if they were going to be ready, and they're not going to be ready. And that whole like urban planning, but going too fast when materialistically you can't do it, is presenting a big limit.
The same. I guess it was the last Olympics in Brazil, was it?
Yeah, it was Tokyo and then Brazil before.
Yeah, but Brazil was way behind in all kinds of things with the Olympics. So,
but yeah, to go on like on the Olympics track, it's also interesting that, for example, housing that they're building for the athletes or the different locations where the Olympic sites, well, they're going to be used and they've planned for them to be used, whereas, an example, for the Rio Olympics, a lot of things were built and now they're just there and no one uses them. And it's a lot of money sent out the window.
Well, as I look out the window in my apartment over the former Michael Reese Hospital, the whole hospital was bought by the city, torn down, and I was to live above the Olympic Village. And then Chicago never received the Olympics, and we've had mud for over 10 years, and no one has decided what to do. So I've been working with the aldermen, 3 aldermen on these issues.
Where is this? Sorry.
It's 2800 South King Drive, between the lakefront.
Thank you.
But this is Okay. Do we have on the, yeah, good. Let me talk a little bit on the rise of the arts. And then cover some of the main readings. This is the last section of readings in the syllabus on the arts. Next session on Wednesday will be a review for the exam. Any questions, any discussion of anything through the course will be fair game for Wednesday of this week. The final exam, I am in total confusion, as are you. I have been most recently emailed to the sociology staff. We're supposed to look into this and get back. There is a listing of that is, as of the last 10 years or so, faculty are not supposed to schedule the exams by day or time the way we used to. We're supposed to leave it to the registrar because the college is doubled in size. There are more students who have conflicts over exam times being in the same time. Therefore, they want to try to coordinate that to minimize conflicts among times. But when I found one document on Box, and it lists all the exams in the entire university, and in sociology it has about 4 courses only, omitting us. And so why we're omitted and why we should do what we should. I've emailed and don't have an answer. So I apologize. Well, it does have, I think, 3 days. If you haven't seen that, I think it's something like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of 3 days after the official. There's an official Christmas break of about 3 days: Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It used to be a reading period. It was called, not a break. It's a reading period. It used to be 2 weeks. Then it was 1 week. Now it's 3 days. And so this is followed by, I think, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the period for final exams. So how we can have, all these courses, all these students in 3 days, I'm worried about choosing a time, and you'll have times that are in conflict with others. But I would expect we should get something in a day or two. I hope, and as soon as I have something clear, I'll send it out. Anything about about timing like that? As I know you were trying to schedule air flights, you're going home, and et cetera, so it's a huge pain. So I apologize, but I don't know what to do. Anybody have any suggestions here?
Could you make it where we just take it on our own time? Like there's a timer set on Canvas and we can just go in between a window.
A time reset?
So like some professors have it where you log into Canvas and you have a window to complete the exam. Let's say you have 24 hours. And once you start the exam, you have to submit it within like an hour or something. If you don't, then we can just take it whenever we have time in that day.
Well, I mean, a thought we could do could be to be say late afternoon or nighttime, and then instead of having 1 hour. On the other hand, the problem for you is it's gonna, if you've got other classes, you can invest a lot of your time on those one, or if you have 2 exams like that, and one which is 1 hour, you may get exhausted on the ones which are long. So I try never to change the rules in the middle of the course. I try to have everything in writing for you and leave it that way for the course. And if we change from a 1 hour to a longer. Okay, so yes. Thanks for. That is an option, is to try to have a longer, or that is, we can choose our own time, and potentially we could do that, and then let the TA arrange for other times for people who have conflicts. So for instance, we could choose the Monday or the Wednesday at our class time, and have that be the time.
Well, what I was suggesting is different insofar as that, like giving us a window, being like you need to complete the exam between 9 a.m. Monday and 9 a.m. Tuesday or whatever. That just allows people to take it whenever they have time within that frame.
And they're still restricted by the 1 hour because once you press start, then
Yeah, you can set a time limit, like
Okay.
1 hour, 2 hours in Canvas, however long you want the exam to be.
Okay, no, I hear that. That's got issues, or at least potential risks, or indeed that is that each of these has advantages. I won't try to go into we can't make decisions as a committee. It's good to input all kinds of suggestions, or if you think of something else, to email afterward. Let's do so. But right now, let's try as well. Anything else on the course, administratively, or anything else you want to raise before I get into the arts? Okay.
If we just want to do the paper, when will that be due?
Yeah, the papers are only an option for grad students.
Oh,
Yeah, read the syllabus. Only, that is, if you want to skip the final, and we still encourage all grad students to take both the midterm and the final, and most have done so, I think. But, if you don't do that, it means you don't do the careful readings until you're not ready. So, it's a good idea. That is, an alternative is you could write a series of little essays about the readings, or inspired by different themes within the readings, along with the final exam, or somehow. If you do as much that it mounts up to 20 pages, that could substitute, but that's a fair amount of work. Okay. The term scene sparks an artistic or aesthetic view. Some elites historically stress elegant tastes, critical aesthetic judgments. The late 20th century brought massive internet audiences. Even low-income youths define personal identity as a music fan of Beyonce or another star, or a clothes brand. New themes are often noted on social media but spread rapidly by political or business leaders who can see a niche. Adjectives like cool, stunning, energizing, breathtaking, we can count, for example, by visitors to Chinese cultural parks. Many tech companies like Samsung and Apple cut hires of computer science and business trained staff while adding artists or persons trained in the arts. About 15 years ago. We did not create with the scenes work on a rise of the arts, although it's a major commitment we now have, but we discovered by examining things like change in types of organizational membership, popular neighborhoods, leading tourist sites like dramatic, one study of which did Chinese tourists go to which cities, and what do they cite as what do they CITE with SITES? And the most frequent thing they list in city after city are these towers, built specially to go up and view the city, which they have in many Chinese cities. And we found again and again that such broad arts concerns rose in the late 20th century. Many changes occurred simultaneously, so it's hard to identify causal structure. But at least I'm going to point to many other things that happened roughly in this period, not everywhere certainly, but the spread of arts scenes elements like glamour, charisma, theatricality help explain some complex dynamics. The new social sciences at the end of the 19th century often ignored the more artistic, subtle, emotional, irrational, or faddish topics. They instead started on basics, simpler things, and made huge progress. About a century later, the social sciences have become central in addressing the harder themes, those left traditionally to journalism, law, public administration. Further, more citizens have grown more educated, more affluent, less constrained by physiological and biological and physical needs, quote unquote. So scenes as an approach or a tool to help many fields push back to identify what, where, and why are some of the several dynamics that seem to combine with arts to give more meaning. How especially to convince skeptics, including ourselves, that the arts are important and should be paid attention to. Okay, one kind of quick, simple answer that is widespread as so-called skeptics are many, including ourselves. And we've read these was in this book. There's a chapter with Peter October. He came and spent a summer in Chicago, and we really came up with this in a simple, quantitative way that it was the arts were taking off in organizational membership, and Putnam was wrong, who just published Bowling Alone, and his big argument was all the organizations are going down. He didn't specifically say there were no exceptions, but he did analyze arts data combined with 20 other kinds of types like churches, neighborhood groups, environmental groups. All of those are going down, but not the arts. Okay, the one headline came from Bloomberg that did an analysis of this, and it was picked up, and this is, for instance, in Fortune magazine, which reads, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and the Barbenheimer films. What are the two Barbenheimer films? Last summer. Oppenheimer and Barbie films are such blockbusters that they'll add $8.5 billion to the U.S. economy in just 3 months. And if you calculate that as a percentage of the gross national product, if you annualize it, which is a strong assumption, but if you do, it would be equal to 1.2% of the entire U.S. GNP. This is probably larger than the automobiles and computer sectors. And this is massive amounts of money and people's time. But more important, probably, if you look at the social media coverage, the emotion, the enthusiasm, the turning out of these crowds together, despite lingering, or more than lingering, serious medical concerns of COVID, of just being together and having coughs and et cetera. And there are similar things happening as we now been looking about, and we're watching for such things. This is happening all around the world. This is old in France. France has been doing stuff like this for hundreds of years, but this is quite new in most, well, places in between are, say, Italy, Spain, with a big Greece with big tourist economies, but they have been the exception. But we're having a big increase in tourism and entertainment. If you knock on the door of City Hall in Chicago, this used to be a dirty industrial city, used to be hogs and so forth. Then it became finance, but then you knock on its door at people there, City Hall. The date that I have pinpointed, 1993 to 94. And that year, in 93, I had two people come were in charge of tourism for the city of Chicago, and an executive director of tourist and related activities. So private and the government top people from Chicago. And I asked them both, how actively does the mayor get involved when you talk about these things? Oh yes, the mayor is interested. I asked the same question the next year, 1994, and they said, we make 5 suggestions and he does 10 things. The mayor got on the bandwagon in that year. And what happened in that 1 year? The World Cup Soccer International Tournament, the Art Institute put on a fascinating show on the Impressionists, and the National U.S. Democratic Party had its national meeting for choosing its presidential candidate. Okay, those 3 things brought in hundreds of thousands of tourists, visitors, business people participating actively in these events, and there was a huge amount raised for hotels, restaurants, taxis, tour guides, and the like, and bang. So that if you will is a big change in Chicago. I'll add is briefly, the oral history, which I've been doing since the election of Harold Washington, 1983, I think it was initially, for about 5 years, first and then second election. With this fan. There's one page, as I say. Look at most of my books. You can find a one-page summary. In the tree, the book is called Trees and Real Violins. Actually, it's a good story for your title that you ought to know. You can take away. Trees. Mayor Daley too planted roughly over 1 million trees. And I had, was it Professor Chin? You were, I think it was you went to New York a couple of weeks ago, and what did you say? That there were very, very few trees. Oh, no, it was not you, it's someone else. It's a former student who's now working for Bloomberg. And he said, he's lived in Hyde Park in Chicago all his life. Went to the lab school at USC, Caltech, and then here. And he says, there are no trees in New York. Chicago has got far more trees than New York, and I like it much. Okay, so he misses the trees. Okay, so Daley and some people around the world are trying to build flowers, trees, shrubs, and so people made fun of putting flowers all over Michigan Avenue, especially South Michigan Avenue, and that kind of thing. Nevertheless, or one more related, there was a study of low-income folks in a discussion with people from outside, saying, what is there which you most need to improve public housing? These were the high-rise skyscrapers that were mostly torn down in Chicago, and these low-income folks. I think these were especially girls, young girls, but they said people would have thought it would be that, you get accosted or beaten up on elevators, you get crime, you get risks of the buildings are falling down, they don't have enough heat, the air conditioning doesn't, or there is no air conditioning or whatever. No, what they said they most wanted to improve public housing was more flowers. Okay, that's like the Chinese finding about the Yangtze River finding. Okay. I'll relate it as I'll pass it on if you don't know what it is. You may not have seen the report. The question is, what these are, I think, millions of Chinese visitors to these parks. What do they most enjoy as exciting? Number one are the ancient history of Chinese local areas, if they have an ancient history. ethnic dance and sort of celebrations and cultural activities like that. And third, bars. Okay, bars. Okay, is that the Chinese dream? Is this the American dream? It can include flowers as well as bars.
Yeah.
Okay.
A different event for a different time of day.
Yes. Okay, the arts and aesthetic brings subtle criteria of style, complexity, and directly touch emotion and feelings. The arts stress more looking inside, more uniquely personal, as well as the more rational, as in Bentham, or traditional in economics, most business models, AI, artificial intelligence, often in cognitive psychology. But even the founders of rational models of life, like Adam Smith, also wrote on ethics and wine, two separate essays. While Pareto, besides his economic major work, was his treatise on sociology, defined as non-rational activity. In the 21st century, economists are doing deep changes in focus, adding topics like art markets, amenities not sold in markets, or in books like Freakonomics, a best-selling theme on National Public Radio by a faculty member here in economics. So, what are the dimensions? I'm not answering here, but I'm pointing out aspects of these which make the arts and related issues important. The arts, number two. One is the subtlety of style, complexity, and emotion. Second, the arts seem to resemble other activities lacking big data, surveys, or census-type information. Instead, ethnographic personal style engagement by analysts who talk with citizens, subjects, more directly also follow an inductive approach to knowledge celebrated by persons like Gertz, Garfinkel, or Herbert Blumer. But as anthropologists have lost their classic isolated villages and subtle topics like happiness, other social scientists can bring tools to examine arts and scenes as new sources emerge for massive big data. Bruno Latour, a top Paris theorist, as visitor to the Chicago Anthropology Department, proposed that we should learn to study clicks on screens, unquote. And when he said that, I can say the anthropologists practically fell off their chairs onto the floor. But soon thereafter that started, Clark and Latour did an international study of cell phone use. Psychologists were the main analysts of happiness surveys until the late 20th century, but economists then splashed into the field to cite a powerful example. How do factors like going to church more often, shopping with friends, or the beauty of flowers or gardens or family love combine with money and jobs to make people happier? Economists and sociologists study these, and they regularly show that occupations and jobs and money explain less than these things that I'm mentioning here, especially personal relationships. Number three, arts and museums have also changed their agendas away from people creating the arts, have shifted away from flowers on paintings or actual flowers instead to do huge street displays of ribbons cutting people and more. Public art was theatrically embraced by many artists and staff, especially in North America, Western Europe, but a few extreme Chinese artists have superstar followings. Extending the counterculture of 1968, artists have added many more politicized themes like explicit focus on inequalities involving gender, race, sexual preference, immigrants, and more. Such efforts to add these social concerns explicitly by artists in their strategic plans in the social backgrounds of arts work featured, such as women or black artists, staff hiring or union policies in the 21st century, often mobilized on particular scandals or events that explode in social movement discussions. Black Lives Matter. These have expanded audiences beyond past leadership by a government agency. That is, these kinds of decisions and criteria were defined more often by government agencies or political party elites. Instead, such buzz dynamics by millions of citizens demand different tools to capture their dynamics. Artists look to citizen concerns for the roots of popularity beyond past patrons or funding sources, which heavily explain many histories of art or focus and style, such as classical or romantic, or the success of one particular artist or musician or singer, for instance. Point 4, the interpenetration of artistic and social issues have grown highly complex, often clear conflicting criteria, even within a single museum. Yet labeling simply as conflicts or complex, scenes analysts flag distinct approaches that operate across much of the world. And I'll just mention briefly we identify as five institutional logics within nonprofits, but also they're found within many other kinds of organizations, governments or corporations. Clientelism, paternalism, bureaucracy, activism such as environmental activism or feminism or black power, and fifth, professionalism. These are developed in the book called The Third Sector by Kelman and Clark. Can the arts add legitimacy to government and charisma with a leader? When a Japanese prime minister came to the U.S., he and the American president visited Elvis Presley's home. The PM sang Elvis songs as classic karaoke. The Japanese MITI, M-I-T-I, the famous National Planning and Economic Development Agency, added a program on cool Japan, including J-pop, manga, anime, video games, fashion, film, consumer electronics, architecture, cuisine, and cuteness, as in Hello Kitty. A 2005 press conference by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs used the concept of gross national happiness. The Japanese efforts were spurred in part by the greater visibility of K-pop from Korea and the Chinese huge cultural efforts building new museums, cultural parks, and more. How can we add structure to interpret such diverse complexities? Okay, I think I've got a lot of stuff there, which I'm skipping over. I'm drawing on what is on the reading list is a book in draft by two of our Chinese active participants in the Scenes Academy, Wu Jun and as the official one, and a grad student who was here in this course about 5 years ago. The The book is a review of, in Chinese, and will come out later on in English, but Dan and I are writing, Dan Silver and I are writing the introduction. And so what I'm drawing from here is some of the, what I'm doing in different areas, I've given you really just one of the arts, is ways of connecting scenes to big theoretical perspectives, such as the links to Marxism, or to the rise of the arts. And so I'm giving you the flavor of this from one or two. And I'll add these are now pretty much related to the arts broadly, but in different ways that illustrate the kinds of perspectives. And I'll say, and remember, the flaneur of Benjamin in Paris, and he detailed one city, which many analysts of scenes have done, especially in China have done, and the same thing in the U.S. I mean, in the community power, we had over 150 community power studies. None of them did more than 4 until I and Peter Rossi and others at NYC first launched the permanent community sample. And then we could both compare as well as do a case study and join and try to generalize. Okay, if we want to generalize, that is, why do something? Why have bigger numbers? Because we have bigger theories. The bigger theories have been there. I mean, one example we cite. We say in scenes, what we do in scenes is we draw and we do some things which are Marxist. We are like Marx. We segment different types of bigger social, holistic elements, from agrarian to industrial to socialist to communist. In those kinds of 4 types, which Marx used, have implied that if you're living in a capitalist society, you tend to focus more on money which can be bought, or things which can be bought or exchanged for monetary media. Media is a use of the term in this context was used by Parsons, and you can then analogously, and he used it in the whole book on power. And he said we can analyze power as a circulatory medium, and power can go up or down the way money does with inflation. And so looking at concepts which economists, and Parsons was trained as an economist, was hired at Harvard initially in economics, and then departed and shifted to sociology. But doing so in a broad interdisciplinary social science sense. So did Habermas. Okay, Habermas. All of you don't know him by name, but he was the most important of the Adorno-Horkheimer students at the Frankfurt School. He later drew from American pragmatism, Parsons, and others to deeply transform the abstract critical style. The work had a dramatic influence, getting many otherwise to focus on empirical analysis, linking with specific cultural content in journals, newspapers, pamphlets that were circulated in Germany, France, and England in the 19th and 20th centuries. The continental cafes stressed the arts, lifestyle, personal connections, and avoided work and politics and money. Instead, in England, the coffee houses, so-called, not cafes, but coffee houses, it was indoors because it was cold, often developed a public sector. The concept of the public sector emerged in England, and this is a major concern of Habermas. And he focused on the coffee houses as the beginnings of the public sector, within which average citizens explicitly could discuss politics and economic issues, leading to wagers if a ship would arrive, what the price might bid for its contents. In the coffee house conversation, these later led to creating insurance companies and stock markets. An important difference between England and the European continent was, so one of these differences was the hierarchical political systems in France and Germany, limited 19th century, broader or 18th, 19th century, topical consideration like politics and money. Censorship was common and applied to books, magazines, newspapers, meetings, often in much of the 19th century. This led Marx to being expelled from Germany, expelled from France, and so he wrote Capital in London, even though he had a lot more Marxist followers on the continent at that point. Subtle analyses of conversation dress, captured in scenes dimensions like glamour, transgression, charisma, self-expression, how people discussed with whom and what types of music or clothes were inspiring or not, food. After the rise of mass education and travel in the late 20th century, national differences may have weakened, but French and Italian taste classically stressed the arts and aesthetics more than the British or the Americans. An Italian sociologist skiing in the US noted that Americans wore similar outfits on the skis in the mountains, while each Italian on a ski slope dressed differently. Think Fellini. Paris and Milan remain centers of art and design, although Seoul and others are challenging. Habermas included some elements of Marx, like suggesting that as national production technologies, not just national, for mass media grew larger and more expensive in the late 19th century and into the 20th, it was bought by large corporations. Media were taken over by larger corporations, and aesthetic concerns declined, especially for Germany and France. His public sphere book is a detailed model of subtle observation and explicitly connecting it with alternative interpretations. And like Benjamin, he details lifestyle and consumption as important independent drivers of the arts and the economy, shifting by types of political leadership, as I've described, the big England versus the continent. And except for Switzerland and the Netherlands, which are Calvinist and linked to New England through the religious and decentralized pattern of Calvinism. Like Benjamin, after Adorno and Horkheimer, Habermas replaced him as leader of the new Frankfurt School, incorporating more explicit attention to the concepts he developed, such as the public, civic activities, and many other links with philosophy and social science, including the counterculture via Parsons, Chicago, and new syntheses of these. The argument about voluntary civic associations is at the center of an ongoing controversy about their changing roles globally, including Habermas, who did a book on student politics, and updating it, adding variations. Internationally, Frankfurt was the world center for countercultural theorizing, inspiring French and American student activists around 1968. Quote, "One can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution since the protest is directed toward the whole of society and its cultural establishment, including the morality of the existing society. What we must undertake is a diffuse disintegration of the entire social system," unquote, wrote Herbert Marcuse, a Frankfurter who moved to California, commenting on the 1960s counterculture. And we live today with that change. We live through the differences I've referred to several times here as the counterculture, as a background framing, reframing, or as we can put it, Marx would have been unhappy, and more strict Marxists would say 1968 was not a revolution. But it did not transform the political system entirely, and it was not an economic revolution in the normal Marxist sense. But it was a cultural revolution, and that's what this Herbert Marcuse, another Frankfurter, referred to that. Robert Putnam stressed similarly declining civility in bowling alone. Jeffrey Alexander did an ambitious work called The Civil Sphere, mostly American. And Megan Kalman and Terry Clark, the third sector, compares China, Japan, Korea, France, and the US in their third sector dynamics in building things like trust and legitimacy. And I studied and visited in Frankfurt with Adorno, Horkheimer, Habermas, noting dramatic scenes differences between Frankfurt, Berlin, and Munich. German students came from across Germany to Frankfurt, which led the three of all cities in Germany on radicalism and protests through the 60s. And then just in linking to the scenes ideas, that I did a PhD on the French university, but included soon with it surveys of American colleges and universities, which I did with Peter Blau and Talcott Parsons. I organized a workshop with Chicago faculty when Talcott Parsons was a visitor to Chicago for 2 years, and I will skip on. Time 25. I will. Maybe skip over. I'll just mention in passing that there's a Birmingham school in England that had a somewhat early, that is, there was a Marxist kind of theory, there was a production-based focus. And the Birmingham school in England focused on the rock and competing musical bands and themes, which the British leaders, including the Beatles, became global phenomena. Dick Hebdig, Hebdig, brought a subtle portrayal of the fandom captured by types of boots versus shoes, motorcycles versus scooters, connecting fans to these differences in symbolic transportation modes and different pop musical stars. They quietly omitted mention of class. An American concept in this domain was Richard Peterson introduced the subtitle From Snob to Omnivore to critique the high versus low culture dichotomy stressed by the Frankfurt School and Bourdieu. Peterson noted that if we look at specific types of music, we find that people listen to Beethoven symphonies also listen to jazz and rock. Analogously, many people do not hold or did not hold a strong social class view that determines their musical taste. Rather, they may be, or they might have been, as he wrote, snobs looking down at jazz and rock. But they don't. So what he added was surveys which showed many people do all of these, and they listen to all three kinds. His label for this collective taste listeners was omnivores, omnivores, who are omnivorous based on their consumption behavior. And Dan Silver extended this idea further when we talked about electivores, eclecticism, and including not chance, but he linked with data on indexes of 15 scenes dimensions in the scenes, as in the scenescapes, including for this coding: lyrics, the overtones of tempo and contrast, adding meaning that together may sound glamorous or theatrical, or the opposite. Many other scenes analysts have and are developing specific arts and cultural analyses, such as Silver's papers on the growth of the arts and ecological competition, the stress on Bohemian themes in downtown, childless singles versus immigrant suburbs in Canadian cities, and more. I had a section on the covenant and Eleazar, but I mean, I've talked already about that, and you have a bit of flavor. I'm introducing it here in part to help interpret the differences between the American East, New England especially, includes, say, New York and the West and Washington, D.C., down to California, with the people migrating across the country tended to self-select and stay if they found a nice place to have a farm in Ohio or Indiana, whereas the people who kept on going further, who wanted more of a revolution, or let's say getting away from their old English or Italian relatives, they became the cowboys. And the nice comparison is, how was the frontier settled in Canada? Anybody know that?
Canada?
Canada. Why was the settling, that is, well, I'm focusing on this because it's a classic concept in American history. It's taken over by Eleazar as a tool, an analytical device for explaining why and how egalitarian increases, and that is sanctified as in Moses' meeting of God on the Sermon of the Mount, bringing back the Ten Commandments to the people, sanctified in a covenant, blessed by God, and given a theological religious meaning, which he defines as distinguishing covenant-based societies, including New England, parts of things linked with Calvinism, but the strongest are places like Iceland, the core of the traditional New England moralists. But some of these people migrated, as Eleazar talked about, from New England to Seattle. So you have this in the northwest of America. Then you had people who arrived in New York. The Middle Atlantic people went through Ohio and then to central California. And then from those who are arriving in Virginia and the South did not have any covenant with God. The New England constitutions very clearly do have this covenant with God at individual cities. When people arrived from Plymouth Rock, Salem, Boston, they have covenant type constitutions. Not in the South, etc. So the idea of where can we generalize this to China, to other places, the idea of a frontier, Eleazar brings in, and so I'm asking you I'm introducing it and to say how this country, which looks nearby, very similar, called Canada, but, and Lipset has played this up more. It has about 100 differences between Canada and the U.S. But I'm not sure if this one is there or not. But I featured it because of Eleazar and the importance of the frontier in American history, as another mighty symbol of governors and of presidents. The cowboy, Ronald Reagan, was a cowboy. John Wayne, the Orange County Airport is the John Wayne Airport, etc. How was the frontier settled in Canada? Not by the county, not by the cowboys or the small town with a mayor, a cowboy, and an outlaw, and the cowboy, that is, the outlaw tries to rob the bank, the cowboy solves it and kills or takes away the outlaw, and people live happily ever after. I mean, those are the classic Hollywood films through the 1920s, through the until 1968. There were named by the French Cahiers du Cinéma, the noir films, the black films, started in the 30s by the European intellectuals, including Bertolt Brecht and Adorno, Horkheimer, and others in Hollywood. They made Hollywood English films. Faulkner even wrote a little bit for some of these, and others. But they were small, unpopular until the audiences changed. They became more alienated, and the two most visible examples were Bonnie and Clyde, which came out in 1968, and I think 3 years later, Chinatown. This is symbolic statement of the Los Angeles school film. The Chinatown is a video exaggerated history of Los Angeles, of the history of Los Angeles. Okay. I'll pause for any. Oh no, we didn't get to the answer. Canada. How is Canada settled? Yes.
This is a total guess, but was it based on other French settled areas? Was it the fur trappers?
No. I mean, they were in Quebec,
Right.
but it wasn't just the Quebecois who went all the way across Canada. I mean, so you had initially people around Toronto, Montreal,
Right.
but as you get into the western areas, they were settled by the Mounties, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on horseback, and they were dressed in a bright red, British-inspired uniform linked back to the King or the Queen of England. Canada was and still is part of the British Commonwealth, and the Queen or the King is the leader of Canada. No such, there was no revolution as the Americans did a revolution. The Canadians never did. And the people who were really against revolution, who lived in Boston or New York, they left, they went to Canada, many of them, or went back to England. Whereas the people who were more revolutionary went south, so there was self-selection there. Or I will add, in Quebec, the French Quebecois, I don't know, English Quebecois, I'm not so sure, but the French Quebecois tend to be more pro-American, in part because they're anti-English. And so I get more welcome to Montreal than I do with the English Canadians, whatever. Dan is popular with the English Canadians. Okay, so the simple point I'm making is, if we look at the big concepts of hierarchy dominates more in Canada, and one major, and then hierarchy, of course, drove Marx out of Germany, out of France, and into England. And so England had less hierarchy politically, and it gave people in the coffee houses to write tracts. The tracts, the little booklets. John Locke, Hobbes, etc., John Stuart Mill. These people wrote tracts that were circulated and discussed and summarized in magazines and debates, and they argued with each other openly. And this continues in the House of Parliament in England, famously. By contrast, the Italians and the French, most specifically, they have the richest man in the world because he owns and sells champagne, dresses, beautiful, the highest quality luxury versions. I mean, I used to serve to French visitors. I would serve an Indiana champagne and a Wisconsin brie. Okay. They do exist, and the French will regularly say, not so bad after all, so forth. But the French do the top versions of these. But that was Benjamin's point. The whole city of Paris and the French economy successfully building on aesthetics and lifestyle through the 19th and 20th centuries without dirty factories, without big industrial plants, and like the Germans and the Americans or the English. Okay. So the arts link more strongly with the Italian taxi drivers sing opera. Italian skiers dress as if they're going to a Hollywood film, etc., etc. So I'm pointing to what the Asians and Chinese think of as Western individualism. I'm pointing to differences within them to try to say where and why do we have more or less, and where and why do we have different types of self-expression. So in England, you could be self-expressive in writing about democracy or civic activities, not in France or Germany traditionally. And so in France or in England, in China today, in most of the Scenes Academy, we've not had much discussion of politics at all. In that sense, we're closer to the French tradition. But this is new. This is new in the sense, and so the Scenes Academy, which we found in these, that is when we try. So the title, Can Tocqueville Karaoke? That is, can we use the arts to redefine the idea of civic participation? Instead of it's not just voting, it can be singing the songs of Elvis and being popular as prime minister, not through voting, but through singing karaoke. Okay. Most of what people give sense of, there are many types of legitimacy you can build, not just through voting, which the New York Times may imply, but that's not true, etc. So that we have lots of propositions in these three books: Cities an Entertainment Machine, The New Political Culture. And so I won't try to summarize these. We've gone over them a bit so far, and they're there for you to peruse in years to come, or before the final exam, if you want to be more serious. But I'm giving you a couple of I'm giving you blocks of areas to think about and talk about, and a couple of big propositions such as the Habermas and the hierarchy. The hierarchy idea, of course, is the central general idea in this book, in The New Political Culture. That we tend to have hierarchies and then people reacting against them. And those kinds of dynamics, which you could say is a version of Hegelian Marxist revolution, is a more less generalized version of the same kind of proposition. We have about 20 propositions, and more than half of them derive from that kind of idea. And many people will talk and think in terms of hierarchies, the establishments. Okay, I'm looking at the other readings. We've covered the big ones. I can elaborate on any of these here, but let me stop and let's see if you have any questions or other things to elaborate or that I've been unclear on. Here's a simple question: how much is what I've said clear or unclear? Something that I can clarify more. Say either yes or no. Don't say nothing, please. Give us a sentence or two from each of you on what I've just said. Some of this is new, but some of this is old, but a lot of this is new for the first time today.
Oh, do you want me to start? Okay.
Sure.
Kind of how the role of the arts has changed.
How about can you turn the camera toward you folks? Yeah. ahead.
How the role of the arts has changed since the 90s, becoming more intertwined with politics and government, and how that's kind of reflected in modern society. So giving like the different examples that you talked about, music, and how the internet has kind of made things more accessible, or like the role of the government in arts, or how economists have kind of changed their discipline to kind of focus more on the arts, things of that nature.
Yeah, are you asking, or are you sort of, or are you summarizing?
Summarizing.
Summarizing, okay, fine. And no challenges or questions, or, okay.
Maybe one of the questions I would have is, you talked about like the differences between like Paris, Milan, and all those traditional like cities and what they in terms of luxury, fashion, and so on. And then you touched upon China and Seoul and South Korea, and I was wondering if you could expand on how they present them being the next cities for those domains.
Yeah, and Seoul is the most dramatic, visible example. There may be Chinese smaller counterparts, but I don't know them so well. There was one mayor who invited me and Richard Florida, and they had actually a former student from here, Seobil Kim, who's organized the conference with a couple of hundred people. But it was on innovation and cultural dynamics, something like that. And the mayor then had a major program of continuing. Well, the former mayor had recently been elected president of Korea after having been mayor of Seoul. And he had done, the most visible thing he had done that made him famous was tearing down the freeway in the middle of Seoul, which was right next to the river. So they took that out, and you had pedestrians and shops alongside, more like the Seine in Paris. And so in Paris, they've done the same thing. They put sand in some areas, so they play volleyball, they have concerts, they dance, and so forth alongside, instead of having freeways, which still are there in part, but they're less visible than. And so as mayor of Seoul, he really explored actively and worked with the companies and others to try to enhance design, industrial design, including clothes design, and in that way directly trying to challenge and catch up with the Milan and Paris, and have done so in general, not in the very high-end expensive designers, but in sort of middle range and less expensive, not really cheap, but the volume and the global volume of Korean clothes has gone up hugely in about 10 years before that.
And even goods like Samsung and those companies.
Yes, yeah, okay, so for example, I was in the Milan, I was in the Rome airport. Rome airport went through massive pictures, and you went through people holding hands, people having fun, people driving a truck, no sign of anything they're advertising. So I said, what's going on here? So I kept looking and looking, and finally I figured out these were Samsung advertisements following or doing the same as Apple, but going further in stressing lifestyle and design, not just the computer at all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, a brief question from earlier. You mentioned back to last lecture, the flaneur, and then how that is just sort of an example of of one city, just a case study. Can we talk a little bit, or can you elaborate maybe a little bit about building broader theories from case studies? Like how exactly does that come, or are we just sort of making observations and comparisons?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I'd say
Yeah.
the quick, simple answer is we need all. We try to combine all. Maybe not everyone doing everything. Maybe some people are really good at statistics. Others maybe more who really want to talk to individuals and record it or whatever, something like that. But the point is, we can every method has its strength and its weaknesses, and so complementing those methods are a way of generating the filling in some of the weaknesses of the gaps, as a way of trying to help both. And so when we launched these propositions, we did about 6 books with very different methods. An oral history of Chicago, which has gone on for 40 years or so. Quantitative studies of U.S. mayors. Another book of 3 books on citizens and the rise of citizens in different ways. And another one that was more on international comparisons, comparing countries as well as cities as well as citizens. Okay, so I would add as well as because you're basically an English Canadian, is that correct?
Yes, I live in a French area, but I'm an English family.
Okay. No, but if you have any quick observations on the differences between the French and the English, or let's say English Canadians living within Quebec is a very good analytical site, because it makes you more self-conscious than if you were just an English Canadian living in English Canada. Then you'll be more self-conscious of the differences. And I've mentioned a few, but in terms of the arts, I've been, as I said, to many conferences in Montreal and Quebec City, because the Quebecois they're doing lots of arts analysis and sociological, social science analyses of the arts, much more than the English Canadians, at least traditionally. Although all the Canadian cities are taking off now, as we are in some U.S. cities, but in some enormous like Chicago, others not at all. Any observations on that?
Is it like a specific English to French comparison within Montreal or outside?
Yeah, and maybe ideally including the arts.
You're right.
For instance, do the English Canadians, did you have any sense from an anecdote that they're less interested in the arts, or they dress less well, they don't have food with it
I will say,
wine?
I haven't had like a lot of travel outside of Montreal in Canada, unfortunately, but within Canada, I could definitely say that like the French are more fashionable, or they care more about that,
Okay.
and they put more effort into that. So that's
Okay.
like an immediate.
Okay, and yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And a quick, and I won't say it now, only enough, but I mean, the gay North American headquarters is Montreal. And African Americans, I live in Bronzeville, I'm proud to say, the African Americans dress better than, much better than people of similar income who are not African American. And that is not, it's not racism, it comes from the American South, and the South is connected to the aristocracy of the French and English manors houses or aristocrats around, of course, Versailles. And so the elegance of dress and conversation, speaking well and enjoying the rapping, African Americans, have a using a pride in using language in ways that the cops do not. Okay. Professor Chen? No comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
Today's content is good. I can understand most of them.
Good. Okay.
I'll keep it brief because I know we're short on time.
Okay.
But I was especially interested in applying what you said about internal American migration, and connecting it to what I know about political science. So, for example, it's well known in election, analytics that Ottawa County, Michigan, which is home to Holland, the town of Holland, and is the suburbs of Grand Rapids, has consistently been the most Republican county in Michigan, and has also been the most rigidly Republican county in Michigan. And so that's one. And the second one is, as the rural Midwest has swung rightward, those areas have not swung toward, those were the only rural adjacent areas that did not swing towards Trump. but stagnated or even a little bit towards Biden. And so people are, what in the elections field are wondering why is that? It seems like it's that Calvinist morality.
Yes, no, absolutely. Now, my sister married a Western Michigan Calvinist, and he was professor of English and dean at Western Michigan University, and they had houses in Kalamazoo and in Holland, and so that's that county. So I visited there many times, and they do have, and Charles Bidwell, I'm a professor here in education and sociology, he studied a number of case studies of that physical area, and indeed the styles of education and the content of their programs were clearly, strongly kind of Calvinist structure. For instance, there was a housing association that would review the application of each person who might buy a home, and there would be a committee that would sort of review the background and the propriety of the person, which in the old days may well have been much more explicitly moral, asking about the Ten Commandments of things of that sort. But that continues today, and they're okay. So that area of Michigan has clearly strong, but in that sense, Trump, that is the more social programs of Trump, certainly alienated many of those proper Calvinists in those, and so you're voting against the traditional in favor of some of the Biden themes against Trump does exactly fit your voting point. Okay, we're at the end of the hour. We can continue with these or any other